Jerry, could you just go through a roll call of the council people and see what departments are on?
Thanks.
Okay, Mayor, you're there. Vice Mayor Fairclough, are you on? Vice Mayor? Okay. Councilman Kelly, are you on?
Yeah, I'm on.
Oh, okay.
You heard the Vice Mayor,
Roth,
right?
are you on? Ms. Fairclough, are you on?
I'm here.
Okay, I hear you now. Okay. Councilman Roth.
Here.
Okay, Ms. Bailey.
Good afternoon. I'm here.
Ms. Avila.
Present.
Who am I missing? Councilman Fletcher.
Yes,
Okay. Okay, and just give us a second, Kate. This got disconnected.
No, I'm back. I'm back. I'm back, Jerry. I'm not sure what happened, but I'm back.
Okay, I think I called all the council, please. Unless I missed a council person.
Okay, so we can get started. If everybody's ready.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you to the manager for compiling her staff and having them available, and thank you to all my fellow elected officials who are here. Before we get started on the subject at hand, there's something that we've all been focused on, and I want to put, we'll put his mayor hat on. Mayor Corradino, I want to put him on the spot for a minute and let him talk to us about the decision this morning at the League of Cities Mayors Coalition with respect to the most recent orders issued by County Mayor Jimenez, if you don't mind, Joe.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, great. I'll get started. Thank you. What happened released through the executive board meeting with two groups, Mayor Carlos the county and his staff and members, and then there's a parallel meeting going on between Mayor Francis Suarez, the mayor of Miami Beach, Mayor Hialeah, and the mayor of Miami. And somehow I got volunteered to participate in both of those meetings as they both consider policy. This week, Mayor Jimenez released a message on Monday stating that he was going to regulate restaurants and gyms. So he brought the and some of the mayors had complained about this. We stated that we felt was appropriate, and I think we impacted a little bit of the regulation and moved on. The mayor subsequently met with restaurant groups and gym groups, and I believe he put out a statement. He kind of defined how to do it. Well, with the mayors across the county, today was a mayor's meeting, and it was decided that we are going to put two together. Number one was we're going to essentially a fight with him over the review on gyms. The reason being because he didn't speak with all of us. He didn't consult us. He didn't use or data in the regulations, and he didn't meet with the other groups before he made the rules. So we're going to have a board meeting tomorrow and vote on that, and then tell us that. The other one was there are CARES Act dollars. The county has $470 million worth of funds that they distributed from the federal government to the county, and the cities want a portion of those, and been going with the county different methodologies for how to get those funds, and we decided today that the best way to get those funds was through a split on population. The county's population methodology is one where they double count Homestead, which is the unincorporated area. And so we're going to battle with them over that, and we'll have more news next week on how successful we are in attaining a split. And that's what I have, sir.
All right. Well, thank you, Mayor Cordino. I know that's the latest and greatest on our on our ongoing battlefront. Just a note, if you can't hear at any point, please chime in and let us know. But I think we've discovered in some of our workshops that if you're not talking, you put yourself on mute, it really cuts down on all the background noise that interferes with whoever's speaking at that moment. So if everybody could put themselves on mute unless you're speaking. In any event, we've all known for a while that this was going to be a difficult budget cycle as soon as the magnitude of COVID-19 and its fallout became really obvious. And at the same time, we've had some really productive conversations and forward-thinking conversations among several council members in response to the civil issues that have come to the forefront in the last month or so. But everything we talk about takes money, and I became concerned that we all, and what I mean is by the seven of us, all are coming from the same place with the same base of knowledge, hear the same answer at the same time with respect to the budget issues, so that when the time comes in the next few weeks to debate setting a potential millage rate and then doing the actual budget work, we're all coming from the same base. So again, I want to thank you all for taking part. What I did in preparation for today over the last few weeks is I went through several times the 2019 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, sometimes referred to as the CAFRA, as well as the budget book, and I printed the one offline on the clerk's website about 3 weeks ago. Now, there may be some page differentiations, but among what I have and what some of you have, but we'll try to make the best of it. If you don't mind, I'll just go through my punch list and throw my questions and concerns out there. Some of it's department by department. I want to start with the CAFRA. And in terms of the long-term debt, clearly we've got, according to the CAFRA, long-term debt of, in round numbers, $90 million. About a third of that, well, not quite a third of that's the general obligation bond for the police department and the Seminole Theater that's collected on the tax bill. But what I wanted to ask is that I come from the position that the general obligation bond payments are satisfied by a line item on our tax bills, and that should be sufficient to cover. But I have two questions. On page 60 of the budget, there's an item of $51,206 which shows appropriation of fund balance. Is that an indication that somehow, somewhere, that what we collected on tax bills was not sufficient to cover the bond payment for the year, and we had to go into general fund? What is that reflective of?
Mr. Mayor, what page?
My version of the budget is page 60, where it shows the $51,206 appropriation of fund balance.
The CAFRA or the budget?
Let me confirm here. I'm turning to my budget. Now I'm looking at page 60 of my budget book, the page entitled GOB Debt Service Fund.
Okay, one second.
Numbers. Where it reflects GOB debt service revenues.
Okay. I'm there, Mayor.
Okay.
What happened is that the initial year when
Wait,
the,
Carlos, before you go on, I want to be there too, and it's not my page 60, I just want to.
I'm sorry, 138. Page 138 of the budget book.
We're good, we're using the exact last one. Okay?
138 of the budget book?
So GOB debt service up at the top.
Which page in the book you all have?
138.
178?
138.
38.
38, yes, 138.
Okay, got it. And for everybody on the line, that's the one that's attached to the car item, 138.
Okay. So, Mr. Mayor, what happened is that the initial year when the bonds were issued and the taxes were collected, we didn't know what the rate was going to be. So at the time, what was charged to everybody and what everybody paid in taxes was a little bit more than what was needed for that initial year. So those funds were kept in reserve, and we've been basically using that for the next couple of years. This may be the last year of those reserves that we're using.
Okay. Appreciate that. Yeah, I just was concerned that represented an amount of shortage, and we had to pull from the general fund.
Not at all,
So,
no.
Okay, so speaking of rate, are we in such a different environment now? Can we refinance the bonds, and are the rates at significantly lower at this point than it would pay us to refinance them?
I would have to look at that, and I have to discuss it with our financial advisor as well to see if it's worth doing.
I mean, certainly I understand the concept of, yes, perhaps the rates are lower, but do the expenses in connection with our bond refi justify
That's correct.
the reduction in the annual payment? Just a thought, because these were done, what, 4 years ago, 5 years ago? And interest rates have certainly taken a dive since then. So just curious. All right. Well, and that springboards me into not our biggest concern, but in my mind are in respect to timing, the city hall debt. And what I get out of this is that sometime next year we have a balloon payment of about $8.5 million due on the $10 million that was borrowed to complete the building of new city hall. Clearly, we don't have $8.5 million in hand to do that. Have we started making inquiry on the refi? In light of the additional debt that the city has that we'll talk about later, are we eligible to do a refi on that $8.5 million?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and in fact, it's just a little history. When the bonds were issued, the amortization of the bonds were done over 20 years, but with the idea that we would repay it within 5 years, primarily with the sale of the old city hall land. That was the intent. And as a result of that, because it was going to be a balloon payment, the rate that we got at the time that we financed it was obviously better rate than if we would have just done a straight 20 years with no balloon payment. Unfortunately, land has not been sold. So therefore, as you stated, there is a balloon payment due in August of 2021. I've already reached out to our bond counsel and our financial advisor to start the refinancing. The recommendation that we had was to probably do it in January. The reason for that, I've been discussing with the manager, and we may or may not do that, considering a disaster line of credit. If we do that, there is a thing called bank qualified rate that if you don't issue more than $10 million in any 1 year, you can get a bank qualified rate. So if we do that this year, this calendar year, for the refinancing, then we can get a bank qualified rate. If we're considering doing a disaster line of credit, then the idea is that would fall into this year, so therefore we would wait until January to initiate it. Either way, if we initiate it in January, we have more than 7 months to accomplish this, so that's plenty of time.
All right, and based on my research, it looks like the City Hall site's about 31 acres, and the debt equates to about $275,000 an acre. Do we have a fairly current appraisal? And is there an actual mortgage on that parcel?
I'm not aware of a current appraisal. I don't believe that there is one. And your last question, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor?
Well, it goes I guess, I divided the debt by the number of acres and came out to about $275,400 an acre. And that would, my curiosity was how that might compare to if we had a current appraisal. And one of the discussions we're going to have and decisions we're going to have to make is what's going to be the future land use of that parcel, which would certainly have tremendous impact on its value in the event of a sale to satisfy that $8.5 million debt at some point in the next few years. So so to answer your question, there wasn't an additional question. Other than
Mayor, just if I may, what we're doing on that site, we are getting an appraisal. We're waiting for the boundary survey to be complete. We're in the process of getting an appraisal on that property.
Well, but how can we appraise it if we don't know what it's going to be used for? I mean, hasn't that kind of been put on the back burner pending getting Homestead safely off the ground?
Yep, some of the things we talked about before, Mayor, potential uses was pre-COVID. But in any event, we are working toward getting some sense of what that property might be worth.
Okay. Well, it has to have some kind of figure based on some kind of use, and I would imagine that a lender is going to require us to have one anyway. Now, in the CAFR, I think it's on page 173. There's a notation that the debt service is now 25.36% of non-capital expenditures. 2 years ago, we were at 6.19%. So that's almost over a fourfold increase. Is that a ratio that's going to impact our rates or our ability to refinance anything in the future?
I wouldn't be able to answer that right now, sir. I have to find out with our financial advisor and see what the impact of that would be. Certainly, every time we're going to do bonds, we do, certain tests, covenant bond tests, to see if we can accept any additional debt. So certainly, we would look at that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I had on City Hall in terms of long-term debt. Moving right along to the 2017 taxable transportation system borrowing with the notation that it was to buy land, build the garage, and retail of $31.5 million. Again, are those rates, have we made inquiry as to whether or not those rates are high enough that it would justify a refi?
No, so the answer is no. No, I've not looked into that. We can certainly look into that.
I mean, I get that, in lay terms, doing some refis could be kicking the can down the road, but, and Kate and I have this running joke. She's the optimist and I'm at the other end of the table as a pessimist. I think we've got some really lean years coming up, and certainly we've got the debt, but, we've got to do what we can do to not impact our quality of life here while meeting that debt. It looks to me like, well, there's a narrative on page 78 of the CAFRA. No, sorry, in the it looks like we're taking about $400,000 a year from the general fund to meet that debt obligation, that it's not necessarily covered in full by surtax. Is that correct, or are we taking some of the surtax revenue and using it elsewhere?
No, that is absolutely correct. At a debt service of $1.8 million at the time that we were issuing the debt, the only amount that we felt could be paid out of surtax, so we could afford out of the surtax, was 1.4. The other 400,000 came out of other non-ad valorem revenues from the general fund. That is correct.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I guess our projection for this year was $3,049,000 and change. Do we have a handle on how that may have been impacted already, and then going forward with COVID?
We actually did receive something from the county, and they're kind of all over the place, anywhere from 2.5% reduction to 20% reduction to 40% reduction. But even at the 40% reduction, we're comfortable enough. We've already looked at it with the Public Works Director, and we're comfortable that we can cover not only the debt service, but the other fixed costs that are paid out of the PPP fund.
But to the extent that those surtax monies are used elsewhere, at 40%, we're looking at $1.2 million that's going to disappear from our budget.
That's, if their projections are correct, but again, it was kind of a range, so I don't think they really clearly knew either.
Okay. That's a wide range from 2% to 40%, but yet we're expected to do our budgeting in the next 60 days.
For the surtax, we are at the mercy of the county. For the sales tax, we are at the mercy of the state. That is correct.
Right. Okay. Moving on, my next item is the new market tax credit, HUD Section 108, and the Qualic B loans. Now, there's a notation in your narrative that the HUD Section 108 loan of $3.9 million was planned to be paid off in March of this year. Where are we with that?
I'm sorry, what are you looking at?
I'm looking at, and this would be, it would be on page 72 of the CAFRA.
Okay.
Where we talked about, and it's for the HUD Section 108 loan, the 3.865.
Correct.
That it would be converted to a fixed term loan in March of this year.
We were anticipating that, but we opted against that right now, to turning it into a fixed loan. So it's currently at a variable rate loan.
Okay, and that $261,000 a year current payments are out of our some CDBG allocations, which we kind of expect to remain stable as a federal allocation.
That's the anticipation, that we will continue to get those funds. So basically $260,000 on the annual action plan that you'll be seeing actually later this month. You will see that debt service there. And again, that's an estimate. It could be less. The principal is clearly $194,000. The balance, based on what the interest rate is, at a variable rate. So we anticipate $260,000.
Okay. Thank you. Now for the hard part. I understand the city did some direct new market tax credit borrowing. And somehow, somewhere, there was some and I don't mean this in a derogatory manner, but some hocus pocus, and new monies were borrowed under that same program, and loans were reallocated. So right now, I'm looking at a narrative that the city loaned $10.8 million to this COCFR 129 investors. Who is that entity? What do they do? How do they fit into this?
It's part of the new market tax credit transaction. It is one of the entities that's involved in that.
Okay, so how do they pay us back? What's our collateral, and what happens? What's our obligation if that stream of payment ends?
Good evening, Mayor. This is Gemma Torsivia. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, Gemma. Hi.
Hi. How are you?
Good. Thank you.
So I just wanted to be clear. We have Greenberg Traurig is the firm that works on new market tax credits, and then Nova Gradic is our accounting firm that works on new market tax credits. And so some of these things might be better explained by them, but I am happy to provide an overview of this transaction. New market tax credits is a federal program that's run through the Federal Reserve. It's enjoyed bipartisan support for over 20 years, and it's used to provide gap financing in certain markets. Markets need to be low income and serve low income communities. So not all areas of the country are eligible for new market tax credits financing. Now, the city of Homestead, at least portions of it, and the location where Homestead Station is located, is eligible for new market tax credits financing. And the way it works is the city of Homestead and governments are not permitted to be direct borrowers for new market tax credits. And so the only way to accomplish a transaction like that is to do it with a non-governmental partner. And so when we were financing Homestead Station, we determined that because there were a number of community benefits that the project brought to the community, that it may be eligible for new market tax credits. And this was approximately 5 to 6 years ago. We had contracted with a company called Willdan, and they had recommended that the project, in one of their economic analyses, potentially be eligible for new market tax credits. Now, new market tax credits are incredibly competitive. The ratio changes from year to year, but approximately for every 30 applications that are received, one is funded. And these are not funded directly by the Federal Reserve, but instead they're funded by CDEs. Now, these CDEs, and there are investors, have direct relationships with the Federal Reserve, and they receive an allocation from the Federal Reserve, which they can then use to invest in a low-income community, in a low-income project. And then there is an investor. So basically on any transaction, you have the Federal Reserve at the top, and they allocate the money. So say, for example, they say, for fiscal year 2020, we are going to allocate $300 million to new market tax credits. All of the eligible CDEs will apply to the Federal Reserve for money and for an allocation of that $300 million. They don't all receive it. So say, for example, 200 CDEs apply, perhaps 50 to 100 receive an allocation. And that allocation award is variable, and it's based on what they said they want to do and their goals are in the low-income community that they intend to serve. So they go to the Fed. So a good example is actually, I'll use the AFL-CIO. So that's an organization that has a supporting organization, which is a CDE. So it's actually not directly the AFL-CIO, but it's a supporting organization thereof. So they apply to the Federal Reserve, and they say, Federal Reserve, we, the AFL-CIO, are committed to creating jobs. And so if you allocate us $20 million of your $300 million for new market tax credits, we will invest that $20 million in low-income communities that create jobs, and then we will report on that to you. So the Fed looks at AFL-CIO and they say, okay, well, I see here you have a project in Detroit that will create 100 jobs and a project in San Diego that will create 1,000 jobs. And these are all proposed projects. And a project in Atlanta that will create 500 jobs. Okay, so we believe that you can justify this $20 million allocation. So then they give it to AFL-CIO. The AFL-CIO does not actually get $20 million in cash. They get a $20 million tax credit. And so an investor, and this is traditionally a bank, not always a bank, but traditionally a bank. So for example, let's say you take Chase Bank. Chase Bank has a number of clients that may want to use new market tax credits as a financial planning strategy. And new market tax credits are realized over a 7-year period. And so a percent of the tax credit is released every year for 7 years. And as a result of that, the money that is invested in a low-income community, in a project in that low-income community, must be tied into that project for 7 years. There are some exceptions, obviously, if there's a fire, or the building burns down, and goes out of business. There are some exceptions, but the goal is to keep that money invested in that low-income community, in that project for 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, the compliance period is over, and so the obligations among the parties go away at that point. The project, is obviously still up and running, hopefully, but they go away. So say, for example, so you have the AFL-CIO. They say, okay, I have $20 million in tax credit. Chase Bank says, okay, great. I would have all of these investors who would like to use new market tax credits over the next 7 years. And so as a strategy in their portfolios. And so then they will essentially buy the tax credits. It's an investment in the tax credit. Now, it's not a full one-for-one, right? So they're not going to spend, obviously, $20 million on $20 million of tax credits because there's administration, and obviously then the CDE who received the tax credit also wants to get a benefit from it, a financial benefit. So let's say, for example, Chase agrees to buy those tax credits from AFL-CIO for $18 million. Then they do that, right? So now you have an investor who has $18 million, and now you actually have real money. So there's real cash sitting in an account at the bank, at Chase, which can then be invested by the AFL-CIO in a specific project or multiple projects. That money is then essentially matched with a project. And at the local level, it's called a QUILICI, and I apologize, I don't always remember all these acronyms, but basically it means a qualified low-income business. Now, in our case, Homestead Station is a qualified low-income business in that, not that it's a business that's low income, but that it's in an area that the Federal Reserve has designated as eligible for new market tax credits. So what we did is we went out and we said, okay, we have this project and we have a budget and we have a gap. So we could have borrowed money, traditional financing, at whatever the prevailing interest rates were to fill that gap, or filled it anyway. But the way new market tax credits work are the CDEs who have the tax credit invest their tax credit in the project, and at the end of the day, when the transaction is closed, the project receives an actual cash benefit. And so in exchange for that cash benefit, the money that I'll just stick with those same numbers. So 20 million AFL-CIO, that's not our circumstance. 20 million AFL-CIO, 18 million Chase, so 18 million real dollars. That money is tied, and that tax credit is tied to the project for the 7-year compliance period. And so the benefit to the project, in our case, Homestead Station, is actual cash that you get to use to build your project. So we received funding from 3 different CDEs for Homestead Station. So 3 different CDEs that got allocation to invest in more projects. One of those is Capital One. Now, Capital One is also the investor bank in the transaction. And so they have a CDE arm of their bank, and they have investment arms. So they were the investor for the entire new market tax credit transaction, and they worked with all three of the CDEs, including the Capital One CDE. So there's a Capital One CDE, then there's MBS, which is a CDE. That's not their full name. They have a more complicated name, which is in the transaction. It's very long. It's like MBS, and it has lots of numbers after it, which is a CDE affiliated with a company called McCormick Barron Salazar, and then one called PCC, which is a CDE that's affiliated with Banco Popular, which is a bank. So we received allocation from those three CDEs. The investor on the deal was Capital One. And so when you look at the transaction, so say, for example, you're looking at the closing documents obviously are extensive, and we are now, I would have to get the accountant and the lawyer or another time, but I'm saying in a public meeting, and go over the closing with you in depth. But essentially, when you look at the closing allocations, it shows each different party, that's probably the cleanest way to explain it, and what they've put in and where. And so we don't actually have, the closing documents are clear, but I will say it's most helpful to sit down with our accountant and our lawyer to walk through it and to look at all of those different accounts. And so as I was saying, each CDE has its own affiliate, right? So there's MBS, which is affiliated with McCormick Barron Salazar, but their entity that invests in new market tax credits is not McCormick Barron Salazar. It's an affiliate, right? And so then what they do, obviously for their own protection, is then they also then create an affiliate of their CDE to invest in the transaction. And so when you look at the closing document, there's just a lot of different companies on there, and these are affiliates of PCC, which is an affiliate of Banco Popular, and an affiliate, the COCRF, that's an affiliate of Capital One. You can sort of tell by their initials, so like CO, and then MBS is the affiliate, and their long name is the affiliate of McCormick Barron Salazar. So I would have to get the exact company or I guess entity from our lawyer to be able to tie that. But the sort of the best way to understand this and the way that I think it makes the most sense is, so Homestead Station, that building has insurance. Because the new market tax credit CDEs and investor Capital One have an interest in the property, not the full property, but in the project for 7 years, of which we're almost 2 years in now, I believe, for the balance of this time, we then provide them documents. They are then named on the insurance accord certificates. So each entity is named, right, because they have a property interest in the project. And that property interest is only for a set period of time. And the city does not, so I believe the full contribution that the city made was $75,000. And I believe the full benefit to the city, as in cash that went into the project that the city does not have to pay back, is, I don't have it in front of me, and we would have to confirm with our accountant, but it was approximately $1.5 million. So the city contributed $75,000. And then there were a lot of other costs. There were a lot of other costs to administer the program. Every different CDE that I explained, MBS, PCC, they all had an attorney. So we had like one of the companies or CDEs had Lathrop Gage, and so they all have their own attorneys. They all have their own accountants. And so there are a lot of costs associated with new market tax credits, but those costs are borne by the tax credit flow of funds. So it doesn't come out of the city's pocket. It comes out of that money that comes originally from the top. So Federal Reserve to CDE to investor to project. And if you go down that flow, all of the different fees, which are substantive, get paid out from that money. And I'll just to sort of give context, the reason new market tax credits has enjoyed bipartisan support for so many years is that it's a federal program that provides benefit to everyone, right? So it provides benefit to professionals like accountants and lawyers, but also to low-income communities to build things like transit centers and hospitals and community centers. And so that's part of the reason it's been a successful program in the United States and has enjoyed support under both Republican and Democratic presidents. And I know that was very long, so I'll be quiet now, and then obviously any questions you have.
Thank you. That's a real insight for me as to how all of that worked and came together. But Gemma, do you have the CAFR in front of you?
I do, yes, sir. What page are you looking at?
Go to page 73, the last paragraph. In the second sentence. Are you there?
Yes, just bear with me. I'm trying to, obviously, I'm trying to
digest it, yes.
No, sorry, you said page 73, sir?
73, yes.
I'm sorry, I have it electronically. I'm still getting to that page. Do you want to ask the question while I'm
finding
finding
the
the page?
Okay. Let me, and my question is predicated on this following premise. That the Homestead Station, Qualic B, or whatever it's called, is essentially an alter ego of the city of Homestead. But for purposes of this financing mechanism, it's a new entity, but it's ultimately one and the same and consolidated into the finances of the city of Homestead. Is that fair?
I need to be very clear that that is not accurate because governments are not permitted to participate in the new market tax credit program. And so we had to be very careful and work with our tax attorneys and our city attorneys to ensure that we have a tax opinion. And again, and this is a conversation that's more appropriate for Greenberg Traurig, the attorneys who work on new market tax credits. But we have a tax opinion, not just from Greenberg Traurig, but I believe Lathrop Gage to the tax opinion. We have a few tax opinions around Homestead Station Quality, and it is very much not because governments are not permitted to receive new market tax credits, which is why the organization was structured and remains structured the way it is, and it's why the board composition is the way it is.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that to not get out in the weeds there. I look at the board structure of the Homestead Station entity, and the board is composed of people, of assistant city managers and directors of the city of Homestead in the majority, and two people who at this point are really not independent of the city of Homestead because they both derive income from the city of Homestead, one being Yvonne Knowles and the other being Tom Jones. So, putting on my, if I were chasing debtors, I would say you can't hide behind that corporate shell. And ultimately, the city, what's been provided to me thus far, tells me that the ultimate control of that entity is the city manager of Homestead, whoever he or she may be. Because
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question. Can you restate that?
Well, my point is I have a hard time accepting the premise that Homestead Station is not an alter ego of the city of Homestead in light of the composition of the board of directors of that entity.
Mayor, I do believe the appropriate conversation is with our New Market Tax Credit Council because they did issue a tax opinion, obviously, which they've issued and has been accepted by all of the New Market Tax Credit partners, including, I think, 4 different national governments and the Federal Reserve at this point. We also have bylaws, which I believe you've been provided, which explain the composition, and I'm happy to read from those now.
No, that's fine, and I haven't been given the bylaws yet, and I asked for all that stuff a couple of weeks ago, but that's really not the point of the conversation tonight. And again, if you're on page 73, the last paragraph, the second sentence, the Quality B also reports 24.7 million in total loans payable, 9 million to the city, and the balance to the other CDEs. Okay, is real money ever going to change hands from the Quality B to the city of Homestead for $9 million?
Again, this is a conversation best had with Greenberg Carrigan, our tax attorney there, Jim. But I just want to be clear, there is a real debt that is associated with the Homestead Station project under the New Market Tax Credit transaction, and that is the issue of the tax opinion.
Well, let me ask it a different way. How is the debt going to be repaid? Is it a stream of income from rent? That's the piece I'm having a hard time putting my finger on.
Mr. Mayor, can I jump in? This is Carlos, and Gemma, correct me if I'm wrong, but at the end of the 7 years, basically the asset, which is currently the asset being stationed, which is currently sitting on the Quality B's books, comes back to our books and it wipes out the debt on both sides of the entities. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gemma, but I believe that is the ultimate goal at the end of 7 years.
Right, and so, but I just want to be very clear on the record, there is true debt that exists, and there is an asset, a real asset, we can all go look and touch, Homestead Station, which reflects that debt. However, because the debt is to the city of Homestead, who's the beneficiary, as in they retain the ownership of Homestead Station, the fee and the building, because of that, in most circumstances, the governmental entity who receives the benefit will forgive the debt to itself. And so, again, no money changed hands. The city of Homestead did not lend anyone $9 million, and we lend, but it is true debt. It is true debt. Again, this is a question best answered by Jim Lang from Greenberg, but it is true debt. It's reflected in the tax opinion. But traditionally, the governmental entity who owns the asset will forgive the debt to itself, which is part of the reason why Homestead Station Quality has been set up as a non-for-profit. Because when that debt is forgiven, as I'm sure you're aware as an attorney, there is a tax liability, right? So let's say it's a $9 million debt that is forgiven. Then there's a tax liability for the company who holds that debt, which is Homestead Station Quality. But if we are a not-for-profit, then there is not a tax liability. I do think that this is a conversation best had with Jim Lang, and I'm happy to get him, to
actually, Gemma, if I may cut in, I think a really good idea. I think we have a meeting scheduled tomorrow, Mayor, if I'm not mistaken, Gemma.
I believe
Jim
we
Lang.
do tomorrow morning.
Could you do a favor, Mayor, and put some of the questions in writing, just so that they have a sense and Gemma has a sense of exactly where you're coming from? Because when you ask the question like you do, it makes perfect sense from the perspective of a typical transaction, which obviously New Markets is not. So if you wouldn't mind, that would be really helpful. I think it's tomorrow afternoon. I don't have my calendar in front of me, and Jim's on that call, right, Gemma?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, it's just, these are shown as long-term liabilities where, and look, let's be realistic. The city took real money out of its pocket, as far as I know and recall, to assemble the underlying dirt. And I guess my real concern is where is or what is our risk for default under any of these lending mechanisms? Again, that may not be a question for any of you all, it may be for our new market tax credit council. That's just.
Yes, ma'am. I believe that is a question for for tax credit council and the city attorney.
Okay. All right. Well, probably more so the new market credit council, because when I spoke with the city attorney last week, he and I had a good laugh over, this was way beyond our pay grade in terms of a very specialized area of lending and the law and government programs. Okay.
So it is, and that's one of the reasons I personally am grateful Jem is still involved, because she kind of is the one who understands it better than the rest of us do. But I look forward to the call tomorrow.
All right, very good. I thought it was at 11, but I'm not sure. Okay.
I think you're right.
Moving right along. Clearly, the CAFRA is effective as of September 30th, but we properly reference the effects of COVID-19 as a subsequent event that we have to take into an account. And my concern is, and again, this has to do with our ability to be in position to refinance at least the City Hall debt and maybe some of this other bonds debt in the future if the interest rate reductions make it, financially justified. So my question is that before the CAFRA was issued and at the beginning of the pandemic, the city was put on a notice of a claim of $13 million, which puts us at risk not only for liability, but for our own attorney's fees and the attorney's fees of the other side. So my question is unless I missed it, I don't see any reference to what I would consider a very significant event in the CAFRA summary. Is that something that the finance department didn't know about, or is it contingent enough that it was affirmatively not taken into account?
And what was the date of
The
that?
$13 million Bert Harris claim that was asserted.
When?
And the first 10 days of the pandemic, that landed on my desk. It was before the end of March, somewhere between the lockdown and the end of March.
Is that an actual notice of claim? Matt, isn't that different than an actual notice based on the
it's a notice
Bert Harris guidelines
of intent, and putting us on notice that they are claiming that claim in the amount of $13 million.
The claim itself, as Mayor, you're well aware, has yet to have been filed, and we'll have a meeting to get direction on how you want to do it. As you know, there's a time frame within which it may be resolved before it's filed and may not become a liability of the city. There's a lot of, I think it's at this point very speculative as to where we're going with that.
All right. Well, understand, with being at the edge of a banking background, if the bank hadn't disclosed something like that, we'd have had our hands cut off when the auditors and the bank examiners came in, if that were not noted. So that's just kind of my perspective on where that was. That seemed to be, it was interesting timing and something that is going to be very relevant for us going forward as we seek to refinance certain debt.
Right, but just as a point of clarification with respect to your point questioning whether it should have been in the CAFRA, I'm assuming that it was appropriate that it wasn't, since it is a Bert Harris claim or a notice that they intend to sue. So I just don't want it to be construed at this point as something that we kept out purposefully.
Well, I'm not asserting that anybody affirmatively concealed it. It's, did we have a failure of communication between manager, legal, and counsel down to the finance department?
I don't think so. Isn't it? What date did you mention, Mayor? the first week of the pandemic. March?
It was. I just recall receiving it probably a week and a half into the lockdown, and remember just thinking how ironic it was with everything else that was falling around us, that was being dropped as well.
I think that the official date time stamp into the city was later in May and not March. I'm not sure how you got it, but okay. I can confirm with the attorneys.
No, I received it.
Okay, you're correct. The city, it was date stamped May 21st when the city received it.
All right. All right. Well, I may have gotten an email earlier. Okay. That's
May 20th.
My recollection was earlier, but hey,
Mayor,
a lot of stuff cluttering our brains at this point.
Mayor,
yeah,
Mayor, and that may be the reason because this report was issued on May 20th.
Yeah, I know. I understand that. I remember finding this on my desk, within a few days after that. So, and that just may be that I received the email earlier, or I'm confusing March with May. Who knows? All right.
I'm just glad there wasn't any breakdown in communication.
Well, it was, that was just something that was in my notes, and it may be my error, but I was concerned that we were silent. If the timing of the assertion or the preliminary assertion of the claim was such that it should have been included here, but either way, I think it's going to be an issue going forward for us. In terms of the whole budget and financing picture. But let me move on and move away from the CAFR now and into my budget notes. And we may have touched this. We don't have any concern that we're not going to be able to meet our debt service for this year, that even with some potentially drastic reductions, we're not to be at risk of defaulting on any of our debt service.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor.
And if you don't mind, Mayor, I would just kind of like to interject a little bit about this year. Unless I don't want to interrupt you. You can continue if you like.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to, and I've spoken to you individually, council members, about this, and based on some estimates we have, we know there's going to be a significant gap this year, at the end of this year. We probably won't have real numbers until later in July or maybe even August. But very early on in this pandemic, we froze all but essential positions. We deferred capital projects to an amount of about $600,000. And in the last several weeks, we've been able to cut overtime by about 50% of the pre-COVID overtime numbers. And more importantly, we expect that the $5.7 million is going to be before the county commission later this month. And in the mayor's words, me as the optimist, I am completely optimistic that we will get their approval. And he probably thinks we won't. So your continuing lobbying efforts in that regard, each council person and mayor, are much appreciated and needed. And also, we were recently able to, with the help of our lobbyists, we were able to set up a call with FEMA officials, our mayor, and offices of Congresswoman Marcusel Powell, Senator Scott, Senator Rubio. And as a result of those discussions, FEMA actually assigned personnel to come to City Hall and work directly with our staff to get us through the process to get what's close to $10 million back for our IRMA reimbursement. And then, of course, as Joe mentioned before, the $480 million or whatever amount the county has from the CARES Act funding, we do expect to get some of that money. So, as much as we're facing a lot of things, we've taken a lot of steps to address it, and I'm confident that we're also going to be seeing some of those monies come in.
And I understand we've had some good meetings with the guys from FEMA that have been here this week.
Yes, ongoing, and as I say, the first time they were here today. And that, for sure, Mayor, that was a direct result of those calls we were able to set up. So it's very encouraging.
And and I'll get to some of those other issues in a few minutes. want to talk about, on page 6 of the budget, we have.
The heading is, Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
since you've got, I think, a very abbreviated version, you may have the numbers only. If you
Yeah,
just
that's right.
put the heading in on your page.
Now, I have the heading, it's a citywide expenses page, and I'm looking here, other funds, let's see, I'm trying to
Probably around 41-ish, Carlos.
well, yeah, probably so. Anyway, it talks about miscellaneous services, and I'm trying to find it in my packages as well. And what caught my eye is that in 2020, we had $7,000 budgeted for miscellaneous services, and in 2018, we had almost $1.5 million. That number was $1,469,180, and I wondered what that drastic was. It a reallocation or a drawing up of that source?
Let's figure out what page we're on.
Hold on.
I'm trying to find it in mine to give you an account number.
I don't see those numbers.
Here we go. It is. Well, the last digits of the account number are 369.91. Miscellaneous services. 369.91-00.
Oh, you're talking in 2018 that it was 1.8.
Well, yeah. This year we're only at 7,000, and in 18 we were at almost $1.5 million.
That was
Is that something that was lost?
No.
Sold somewhere else.
No, it's the money that came in that was related to the new market tax credit transaction.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. That temporary, the first bridge loan, I guess. Or
that, and hopefully no more.
okay. All right. All right. So then I note on my page 10, it's the line item for the internal auditor. And in 2 years, the cost of the internal auditor has jumped from, and again, round numbers, from 70 to 128.5.
It hasn't jumped, Mr. Mayor. Basically, we budget $128,000 for the internal auditor every year. If you're seeing anything less than that, it was the activity that was performed in that year was less than the amount that we budgeted.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, because that's under actual expenses. All right. And you're right. It's consistently, it was for 19 adopted and adjusted. We're within those same range, but for some reason it only cost I'm sorry to use that word, $70,000 in 18. So that's a budget amount, not a hard and fast definite.
Correct. It depended on the level of audit that they did that particular year. So.
Okay. All right. Now, in my notes here, just some budget highlights that I saw, and this is kind of across the board. I noticed that our total telephone expenses seem to be almost $1 million a year. Now, I say that with the understanding that virtually every employee is on call 24/7, and they've accepted that responsibility, and we've pretty much provided them with a cell phone. But that equates to almost $2,500 a year. Is that something that we can sharpen our pencils on? Is that something we've already done?
Mr. Mayor, are you referring to the account 3455 and one that is 3455, which is telephones?
Well, no, I'm looking at citywide.
Uh-huh.
I went through every department in my budget reconciliation, if you will.
Okay.
I added up all of those line items and came up with $980,000.
Yes. Some of it would be cell phones. Some of it is the citywide, like the phone.
Citywide phone system. Each department pays for it's Jerry, Mayor. Each department pays for its portion of the citywide phone system. That's why you see it in every department. It's not just cell phone.
No, I understand it's also landlines as well.
Okay.
Correct.
But, I mean, let me go back and say that, you know, as we go forward with this budgeting, my perspective is, to use some analogies, not only are we looking for paper money floating around in the dryer or pants pockets, but we're digging change out of the couch cushions. And
Yeah, and Mayor, we can look at that for sure. We can.
And again,
we are
not-
looking at
not
everything, and we can, you know, add that
that's
to the
just
list.
something that caught my eye as some departments having a huge budget line item for telephone. The same thing with what's called professional services, which are not, they don't appear to be legal fees, that they are, you know, other than legal. Legal, I think, is clearly delineated. And I just don't like to have an idea. For example, the clerk had $268,000. Development Services had $1.3 million. PTT had $673,000 of professional services. Can you just give us an example of who and what those services might be?
I'll use development services since that's probably one of the biggest one, and that's primarily the inspection services provided by MP Cosley and CAP.
Okay, all right. Because I'm going to assume that a lot of the other development services expenses are captured in the cost recovery charges to our applicants. But this would be above and beyond that.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Fair enough. What example would be $268,000 in the clerk's office?
I believe one of them is the recording of the meetings would be one. And look it up. Hold on. Second.
Closed cap.
Carlos, it's elections.
Oh, the elections. Thank you. You're right. And Mayor, just so that you know, that one always fluctuates. You know, it swings every year. One year you have the election, so it's up. The next year you don't have the election, it comes down. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah, it actually goes like 14,000 to 268,000. So that reflects the different years.
But okay, and let's not create a bad inference for my council colleagues in our discussion next week. That's not to say elections cost $225,000, because that is certainly not the number that the clerk and I have been discussing at our charter review meetings. So let's not blame it all on elections. Let's don't pollute that well before we have that meeting next week.
Mr. Mayor, and I believe Liz can jump in, but I believe for the general election, I mean the initial and the primary, and then the general election. So budget for two. Now, if one happens and the other one is not needed, then obviously there would be a savings. But I believe that both of them are budgeted, and it's for those amounts.
Well, and a couple of weeks ago at charter review, the clerk had gotten the cost from the elections department. Just a hypothetical, if we had to have a standalone special election to fill a council seat, and the number that was circulated was about $20,000.
Mr. Mayor, that was not a standalone. That was to piggyback off of the county's general election in November, sir.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. All right. For example, would be surveyors, appraisals, etc.
Mayor, I think you broke up. I'm not sure if you just asked a question.
Okay, yeah. CRA, the $200,000 in the CRA, for example, would be surveyors, appraisers, that type of expense.
That would, yeah, without looking at the actual account, so tell me.
All right, and then it's interesting, there was a PPT entry of $673,000 for professional services.
Where, the mayor, you.
Let me see if I can,
help me out a little bit.
cross-reference it there to, okay. In the PPT, the transportation heading, PTP expenses hyphen transportation, we've got, professional services at 39,612, account number, 3305, 541-3305.
Yeah, Mayor. Okay.
Carlos, check page 140. I think it's
Yeah,
140.
I'm there. Yeah, I'm talking about this one. Talking 675 under Division 5011? Transit or transportation that you're referring to?
Transportation.
Transportation.
541-3305.
3305, okay.
Or 39,612.
Yeah, give me a second.
And then on transit, we've got 633.5 on the next page for professional services.
Okay, that year count, Mr. Mayor?
That's current year, yeah.
Even though there was 296,000.
No, I'm looking at the 39,612 for this year.
Right, unless the only $36,000 was expended.
Okay. And then we've got this year on the next page under transit up to $633,000. What would that entail?
Mayor, this is Julio, Public Works.
Sure.
Basically, what we do with PTP funds is we get that money up front. We usually put it in places as a placeholder in case we're going to use it through the year or not. And then if we don't use it, that money gets rolled over to the next following year. Usually what happens with transportation projects, the amount of money that we have available from a year-to-year basis is not large enough to do a real substantial project. So that's why we keep holding that money and moving it over. So what you're seeing there is budgeted monies that it's basically a placeholder, so we can use it if we need it as we accumulate more funds from year to year.
So, Carlos, what you just pointed out in respect to what Julio just said, in the fiscal year 2019, though it was 296, the actual was 36, correct?
Correct. The rest just gets rolled over if we don't use it.
Correct.
Well, I don't know, because it says the adopted 19 was 30,400, the adjusted was 296.
Because, again, in most of it, and this is throughout the budget, when you're seeing in the adjusted, that represents every year in the month of November, basically all purchase orders for capital projects, basically that aren't spent, are reappropriated into the new year. So the main thing that shows is the difference between the original and the adjusted, for the most part, will be those POs that are rolled over that weren't used in the prior year for capital projects that were pending, or in this case, for PPP projects.
Okay. Now, would that be kind of a similar explanation? I see a lot of that in the electric utility department. I see several items in the public works section. Over $1 million in what's called professional services. So you tell me those are more placeholders than anything.
No, that's
I can speak for electric. This is Barbara, Mr. Mayor.
Mm-hmm.
We have a variety of different things under professional services. We have 7 divisions in our organization. So, for example, we've got site cleanup that we have to perform on occasion at the plant. That's about $150,000, and that's done through professional services. We have tree trimming that we do on a yearly basis, and that is done through professional services. We don't have folks in the city who are employees that do the tree trimming. It's done through an organization. Mm-hmm. We also have engineering consultants that are done through professional services, and we've had consulting in the regulatory area as well through professional services. So, and also it's things for the plant, such as waste removal, permits, wastewater permits, storage tank inspections, DERM permits. There are a good 15 items that are under the power plant that fall under professional services for some of the things I just mentioned. And again, it's also engineering services, and with the expansion at the Renaissance substation and the upcoming construction of a new substation, US 1 and 296th Street, we've had quite a bit of engineering services required to help us with those projects. And we also use engineering services in areas that we just don't have the detailed expertise. So that's why you see a large amount for electric in this area.
Okay.
And I also do public works as well. For example, we have state, county, and even federal regulations that we have to meet. Have unfunded mandates in a way that we have to do all sorts of reports, studies. So we're constantly, using consulting services to do those works for us. In addition, leak mitigation work that we're doing at the rock pit. So those are all things that come out of these funds that, when you add them up, but we have a list of all the projects, and basically what we do is we know what the cost is going to be for these professional services for each one of these, eligible projects that fall under water, wastewater, streets, stormwater, and solid waste. And they all have different requirements, but similar to what the electric utilities are saying, we basically just bunch them all together into that one line item, but that one line item, we have everything listed on there, so we know exactly what each dollar goes for.
Okay, just, and again, those things that caught my attention, I know we've got separate line items for legal and separate items for different things. It would be similar, and the numbers, again, the magnitude of the numbers are something that caught my attention, not only as a big number in normal times, but as some pretty significant budget hits going forward. Okay. Everybody's favorite contingencies. And my numbers look like we've got about $1.8 million in contingencies sprinkled throughout the budget without taking into account the art and public places amount of about $2 million and the Gloucester Park expansion of several $1 million. I guess the bull in the china shop question is at this point, have all of the contingencies been diverted to cover the $1.7 million in police overtime that wasn't budgeted?
Councilman, I'm sorry, I apologize, Mr. Mayor. No, outside of the two that you mentioned and the normal contingency that we budget every year in the general fund, which is for about $245,000, in 2019, the sprinkled contingency had to do with COLAs. We were still in negotiations in 2019 on the union contract. So not to show anybody what was available, but any money that we were going to use for that, we're putting contingencies rather than into the wages account. And that goes across the board with the exception of the two that you mentioned and about $245,000 in the general fund.
Okay, yeah, because when I looked at the Homestead Miami Speedway contingency of $405,000, that was really an attention getter.
That one's different. I apologize. That one's different. The reason for that is we're getting $1 million every year from the lease until 2032. The property taxes that we're currently paying are about $600,000. So therefore, the difference is $400,000. We no longer have to pay the debt service, so that's why that's listed as contingency.
Okay. So then I guess let me jump forward in my notes then and tell me how we've covered all this overtime that's been incurred as a result of COVID. Where did that money come from?
In 2020, primarily the police overtime is the most significant. It's about $949,000, approximately that. We have a DOJ grant that we were awarded for $183,000 to cover that. We also council approved the CDBG CV funds from the CARES Act for about $312,000 that we're hoping that's going to that. We've also been in contact with FEMA, and then most recently we received the information from the county with their portion of the CARES Act to also be used for funding. So our goal is that between those four funding, we can basically cover the overtime and other costs. It's not just overtime. There were other costs that were incurred as well related to COVID-19 over and above what we would normally incur in our budget.
Okay, but I guess the last year-to-date report I've seen would have been what, ending April 30th, where the overtime paid of about $1,700,000, $1,800,000 was, my recollection is, 128% of the budgeted amount.
That's correct.
And here's my real question, I guess. We've written those paychecks. Where did that money come from?
Sir, we're not through with the rest of the year, so that department currently has funds elsewhere. So between now and the end of the fiscal year, we're confident that we will have those other resources as funding sources to cover it.
There's that damn optimism.
It's not, sir. But at the end of the year, what normally would happen is that we would come to council, we would have to amend the budget, and basically we would have to take the money out of fund balance. But we're hoping that that is not the case because, again, as to borrow Kate's comment, we are very confident that we will get all those funding in place.
Right, and we'll also mention we're not going to borrow that worry. And the reality is, like, all kidding aside, it was money well spent because it saved lives. I think that early on, what we did, the benefits of that were quite evident. And I'm really confident that much of that money is going to be reimbursed.
I hope so. And just doing some quick math, and not that we're allowed to utilize all of it, but if you take that $270 million that the mayors assert is due to the cities, and you divide that among the number of people living in incorporated areas, that could be as much as $13 million coming to us from the CARES Act on a best case scenario.
You're almost sounding like an optimist.
For municipality, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, because the request is for splitting the 470 down the middle. And then if you say the population of Miami-Dade is 2.7 million, and the cities represent 57% of that, and arrive at a per capita basis for municipal populations, and multiply that by 75,000, the number I came up with in the meeting today was about $13 million. With the understanding, though, that that's not, it's got to be allocated within the parameters of the use of the money. And one of the huge discussions was, well, what happens to the, quote, leftover money? We're all going to be going to the feds asking them to let us keep it.
Wow.
Let's don't spend money we don't have yet. But those are the numbers that were kicked around in the meeting this morning. Now, bear in mind for everybody else, the county has not yet seeded that issue as to splitting it in half. That's our request. Is that correct, Mr. Cordino? Joe went to count his money.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir. That's absolutely
Okay.
yes, sir. That's absolutely correct. They have. We're still talking with them, and they're. When we first asked the mayor, he said he wasn't willing to give any of the money over.
Right. That's right. So that's still in play, and I think the mayor's group coalition is concerned that the county's going to spend it faster than we can strike a deal with them. But let me go forward then. Looking at bad debt compilations for the electric utility, water and sewer, stormwater, and solid waste, I came up with a total bad debt of about $950,000. Now, is that a rolling amount, or is that this year alone anticipated?
It could be for that year alone. If you look in the capper under the for the receivables, you'll see what the allowance for bad debt accumulated is.
Right, that's about 11 million. So I was assuming that this was 1 year out of, let's say, a 10-year average. So are we even beginning to have a handle on where we're going to be on back billing, past dues? Or is it just too early to know?
Mr. Mayor, it's currently too early because, again, the reason why some of the aging right now would be high is because we were purposely not turning off. So it would be skewing anything. This will be reevaluated at the end of the year. I mean, the assessment for that debt is done only once a year. It's not done, every month. We will certainly look at that. And, just recently, I think the orders to start maybe shutting off started, so we made them be getting a better idea. So, but by year end, we should know and have a better picture.
Okay. It puts us in a tough situation as we set our potential millage rates and go.
Remember, Mr. Mayor, the millage rate doesn't really affect the enterprise funds. These are all enterprise funds. It's primarily for the millage rate is primarily for the general fund.
No, I understand. All right. Moving right along, and we've already touched on management and consulting and so forth. We got just throughout the budget, there are additional items for maintenance and licenses. Is that similar to what we recently dealt with on the Seminole Theater maintenance contracts, or we've got contractors that come in for an annual fee and work on every facility? It's called not necessarily building maintenance. It's referred to as
Contract and maintenance or something?
Yeah, contracts. Yeah, maintenance contracts.
Yeah, that would be an example, like even for yes. In most cases, that's what it would be. If you can give me a specific account, I can look up and give you an idea.
No, not particular, but as we went through with the Seminole, they were high enough to catch my another expense that caught my attention, and maybe we've not utilized it, and it's building in cushion, I don't know. But it seems that our budget allocations for fuel and auto repair and maintenance within the PD really went up from last year to this year. And I guess my question is I know we're in the process of rebuilding or providing a new fleet under the capital improvement plan. Are these cars less fuel efficient? Did we not allocate enough last year? Do we anticipate that maintenance and repair is going to go down as a result of the new vehicles being added to the fleet?
Hey, Mary.
Yeah, I think that.
Oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Jared.
No,
No, I was just going to say that I believe the issue is that these cars are coming off of warranty, so the repairs, the repeated repairs are going to be quite costly. And yes, to answer your question, if the cars are replaced, then obviously the maintenance would go down because of those repairs being under warranty.
And we've done several replacements this year, so hopefully next year we can look to some significant reductions there. Okay. Speaking of the Seminole Theater, it appears to me that above and beyond the bond payments, we are subsidizing them to the tune of about $460,000 a year. Is that by contract? Is that something we're locked into? If so, for how long?
Mr. Mayor, as far as what we're locked into with the agreement, there's a management agreement with Pinnacle. The management fee is approximately $100,000, and there was always a subsidy for them, about $150,000. I think the management fee gets amended by a CPI. The rest of the costs here are borne by us for certain operations of the theater, like maintaining the AC or certain repairs that we have to do. So you're correct. The amount is about $450,000. I think it's been constant, but of that, the only thing that is contractual is with Pinnacle, which is again about $250,000.
And I think with respect to the Seminole Theater and whatever investment we do put in there, it's important to understand the return on investment because they regularly give us figures on what kind of expenditures they have. And they're looking at over $3 million since they opened, $3 million in direct household income, putting the equivalent of about 150 full-time jobs, contributing revenue to local and state government. So there's lots of return on that because it's been such an incredibly successful venture.
Okay. Then we've got there's an amount. I think it's on page. Let me make sure. My page 48. It has to do with confiscated property under the expenses for the state portion of confiscated property. Account number 521.3487.
Which one? I'm sorry.
521.34-87.
And what's it titled, Mayor? What's it called?
Well, it's called unavailable, and it's nearly $360,000.
Oh, okay. Yes, sir. Well, what that is it's basically we put it in unavailable because it's got to be used towards the PAL expenditures over the next 5 years. We don't know with confiscated funds. You don't know. You can't budget for revenues coming in. You can't budget for confiscated funds. So it would be no different than if we had entered into a lease for 5 years, and since I don't know what money is coming in, I want to make sure that I set aside certain funds. So originally, the year that we were going to do this, there were some vehicles that were going to be leased, and the PAL expenditures So basically what we did is those monies were set aside. It's almost parallel to a lease of the general fund over the next 5 years. The PAL expenditures will move over to confiscated funds to be paid out of there for the next 5 years. So those funds are committed to those programs over the next 5 years.
Okay, all right, because unavailable, I read unavailable and it says, sorry, I can't tell you what we did with it.
Finance to basically departments, they can't use it. That's
Okay.
to me. Sorry.
It's committed.
It's committed.
Okay, yeah. Gosh, that's, and that's really, it's an interesting concept that when we catch more bad guys and presumably crime is worse, we get more of their money to play with. I mean, on one hand, we want there to be $0, and on the other hand, we like to use the bad guys' money. Anyway, okay. Moving on to the CRA, the first page of expenses. Now I take that back. Where was I? Oh, no. Pay the public safety section of the CRA expenses.
Page 133, for everybody that has their budget book. On page 133, yes, sir. What's the question?
Okay. Question is how many officers, or does that pay for an officer and a staff member? Is there code enforcement mixed in there? What does that cover?
One police officer and one code enforcement officer. Several years ago, it was 2 and 2. And I know that some members of the council, wanted some of that to shift back to the general fund, and we were able to accomplish that 1 year. But the rest of the years, it's been a struggle for the general fund to be able to fund those back in there. And I believe, and maybe Kamitra can speak to it, but we really believe that this is justified in the CRA to remain there. And Kamitra, can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, and in our plan, community policing is a big part of our updated plan as well as our old plan. So that is why we feel like that having the code enforcement officer as well as the community policing officer as part of our budget fits in line with what we are assigned to do as a CRA. If you recall from our plan that was just recently updated, the majority of the code violations that happen within the city happen within the CRA. So, there is definitely a need for code enforcement, even just based on those numbers there. But also the community policing, that's what's been helping us keep crime down. That's what's been helping us assist our local businesses to feel safe and secure. And it's just a big part of not just our CRA, but typically CRAs across the board.
Yeah, and I understand the concept. I mean, we did that during my prior years on council, and I understand that it is legitimately allocable to the CRA budget. And I was just curious as to what we were covering. I know that in many years in the past, we covered far more than what you're telling me we're covered now. And no, I just needed some clarification on that. I'm fully on board with that philosophy, and again, just curious as to what was being covered by that. Okay, so my next item is the surtax, the PPT. Let me get on my page here. Again, you may have whose wages are paid out of that? What does that do? Is that the trolley system essentially?
For everybody else, if they're following in the budget book, I believe they're on page 140 of the complete budget book. You're looking at division 5010 or 5011. Well, I guess it is only 5010. Sorry.
Well, I can explain. Mayor Dusuli again. The PPP fund, basically, we get a certain amount of money. That money that we get, which is similar to what you were talking about with the money that we think we're going to get regarding the COVID expenses. The county keeps 80% of the total monies collected for surtax, for the not petty sales tax. The other 20% goes to the cities, and that gets divided up by all the cities based on population. Now, the number that we get is a total amount. Now, to that total amount, we are mandated to spend at least 20% of it for transit. That means trolleys or bus stops or that type of operations. The other 80%, it's flexible. We can also use the other 80% for transit expenses as well, or use it a combination of transit and transportation. But the one requirement that they do have is that at least 20% of the monies that we get has to be spent towards trolley. Some cities use 100% of their surtaxes just for transit operations, and others don't. It depends on the city. But that's basically the requirement for those funds.
Okay, so, but the wages are for what? The line item 148.8.
The thing is, the surtax, they have a certain percentage of it can be used for administrative purposes and for actual salaries of personnel that are used to, through transit or transportation projects. If we have a transportation project going on and we have inspectors going out there, or we have, field crews going out there and cleaning up, that can be used towards that. And at the very beginning, when the surtax was set up, there was a number that was put in that was basically the maintenance of effort. That number meant that whatever expenses that we had prior to getting the surtax are not eligible to be covered by the surtax. It's only the additional expenses from that moment forward that we can use towards that. And that includes personnel, if we do have it, and also administrative expenses, in addition to the actual cost of the projects themselves.
Okay. Fair enough. I just, curious as to what that allocation was, whether or not it was, within city employees or for the trolley drivers or just what it.
That's all the employees. The trolley drivers are under their contract that we have with a private entity, and they get paid through them, not through us. We just pay the entity for the service.
Okay. Well, and then going to the next page, again, you've got the line item this year for $633,000 in professional services.
Trolley services.
Correct, and that's primarily trolley services, which is around 500. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it's around $580,000 a year that we pay towards the trolley services, and that includes basically fuel, maintenance, and the driving operation of the trolleys themselves. I don't do that.
Mr. Mayor?
Hello?
Mr. Mayor?
Hello?
We can hear you. Hello?
You can hear the mayor?
Yes, I can hear you here, but I cannot hear the mayor.
I don't hear them.
Kate?
I'm still here. I'll text him.
Okay.
We can run upstairs if it's here in City Hall.
Well, let's see. does anybody
Okay,
else?
I'm
Any
back.
other?
I guess I lost the signal.
Oh, okay.
You're back.
Yeah, I had to sign out and sign back in.
Trolley expenses for that account?
Yeah, the 633. Okay.
Yeah.
That's where we
Okay.
left that.
Okay.
All right. Just something else caught my attention. In 2019, with respect to the library, we paid $831,000 for professional services and almost $90,000 in bank service charges. I'm assuming that's not a bank account charge. That would have been some loan closing costs.
That has to do with the closing for the loan, the HUD loan, the $3.8 million HUD loan. And there's still fees that we have to pay every time we do the drawdown or make payments.
Okay. All right. And again, I want to go through and hitting the high points of things that caught my attention. And I know we're going down the road of resolving the credit card fee issue that was $500,000 that we incurred last year that over the next year or so will go away. But in the customer service department, let me find it where we can cross-reference here. It would be the continuation page of customer service expenses.
Mr. Mayor, hold on. For everybody else that's following in the budget book, it would be page 187.
There's an item for maintenance contracts and licenses of $150,000. Can you give me just an example of what that is?
1 second. Maintenance and contracts. Is that 60 accounts, sir?
That is
that the account?
19.35-60.
Yes, okay. 1 second. Data pros, which see the printing of the bills, that's the bulk of it. That's about $76,000.
Wow.
Works for the IDR systems, about $15,500.
Wow.
For the handheld machines, $39,000, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Just again, that was a large enough amount to catch my attention to, as we go forward. So let's see, we talked about the potential CITT, FEMA, CARES Act, and COVID money. None of us have a crystal ball as to what our impact's going to be for non-ad valorem or non-general fund revenues. You've already answered my question. Are we at risk under any of these items? I guess, let's see, to make sure that's everything I had covered. It looks like it is, and again, I wanted to have a better handle on where things were going, what they meant, and why we were spending the money, and what our potential, COVID impact is going forward. This is very likely going to be the most difficult year in budgeting since Mr. Fletcher sat on council in 1999. But yeah, I want to thank all of you all for bearing with me and allowing me to go through line by line. And I just wonder if any of my elected colleagues have any questions or comments going forward.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Councilman Roth here. A very interesting discussion. I want to say to everyone who participated from our staff, it was very, very impressive. And our city should be proud of your knowledge and what you guys have done to prepare us for the future. I, too, am worried about the effect of COVID and our revenues to the city. Hearing this discussion tonight, I can't be more proud of your preparation, your forethought, and your thoughts for the future of the city, and how much each and every one of you care for the citizens. They should be proud to have professionals like you working for the city. Again, I applaud your effort, your knowledge, and your forethought in preparation for what we may face in the future with shortfalls in the budget. It sounds to me, going through and listening to this discussion, that this city is in very good hands with all of you. I applaud you and thank you for the time, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Roth.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councilman Ross. That's much appreciated.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilwoman Avila.
Thank you. Larry, Councilman Roth took the words right out of my mouth. I also want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, for putting the workshop together. It was fascinating to be enlightened with several of the items that I was already trying to grasp my mind around, but being able to delve deeper into the core subjects you brought to our attention really made it very helpful. And took a lot of the good ideas that I wanted to bring to the table with consideration for refinancing our bonds. I think there's definitely opportunity there. I'm not sure how much lower we can go with the rates we already have, but it's definitely an opportunity to look and see what we can do. And I want to thank the staff. Kudos to all of you. You've done an excellent job with explaining everything to us, and in the manner in which that not only for us to understand, but for any of our residents that are calling it or listening in, I'm sure that it really was helpful for them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Well, thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to all the directors. Thanks to that barking dog. And
thank you all.
Much appreciated. Okay.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.